Welcome to Level Up Africa. Here we're talking about game dev, and we're going to take a look at the Unity editor, which is the tool you use to make games with the Unity engine. So in this video, we'll do brief introductions about ourselves. We'll take a look at the Unity editor, talk about some core concepts, and then we'll jump into Unity and do a demo showing the project that we've got for this video series. So, brief introductions here. My name's Sam. I'm from the States, and I'm a Unity game dev with over 20 years experience on the dev side.
I'm Brian the Beest, professional gamer, gaming mentor. If it's gaming, I'm all about it.
Nice. So Brian and I met here in Nairobi, Kenya, where I'm doing some teaching and learning along the way about how different types of game professionals get into the gaming industry and what they do. So some of us are game developers, artists. Brian's a gaming professional as well as a player, and looking at opportunities to create content like this video series, make gaming projects together, learn and teach together as well. So we'll be looking at the Unity editor in this video, and one of the things I'm going to show off is a free sample project, which you can download from the link below. Unity, the program, is free to use, so if you're inspired by what you see here in the video, you can download, click around, create something new, or add on to whatever the project that you see here in front of you. So let's talk about the Unity editor. So Unity is the company that creates the Unity editor. It is the Unity runtime. It's all the services around creating games. So the word Unity is used for a lot of different stuff. When we're talking about the program that we open up and do our work inside, that's the editor. So this is available for Windows, for Mac, for Linux. I'm running on Windows today. It's freely available. The relationship that Unity has to build new game developers in the industry is to give them a full copy for free. Anybody can go to the website and download it for free. It's only when you become a profitable company as a group of young indie devs, launching your first title and making money, then you pay a monthly fee to use the project. So for us learning, it's fantastic because it's free. With Unity, you can do things like import your code, import the art, you do it, your level design inside of it. You also play test the game, and we'll see a demo of that here. And then you export or deploy your game. Unity deploys to all sorts of platforms, like everything from mobile to VR to Steam games on your PC, everywhere. Consoles as well, Xbox, PlayStation, Switch, it does it all. So you can create one project in one spot, and as a final step, be able to deploy it to all those and play it on your own phone, which is cool. So here's a screenshot of Unity's website. So as of today, their marketing campaign is about big dreams and creating those projects with game experiences, simulation, doing Unity work in the film industry, the gambling industry. There's all sorts of ways that Unity fits in to software technology. The one that I'm most passionate about is creating game experiences. So that's what we're talking about here. As I mentioned, it has a free student and free personal edition, so you can download it right from the website. You do need to have your own laptop that's fairly powerful. It doesn't need to be new. It doesn't need to be the best gaming rig, but you are dealing with some 3D and 2D graphics technology, so you need to have something that I'd say less than 3 or 4 years old, and you should be pretty good. The Unity editor itself, which will open up, has some different key areas that you can drag around and reorganize so that you can have it work for the best with your own workflow. So starting, I'll just give the recap here. Number one is the project assets. You can think of this like the library of all possible things that could be in your game. If it's sitting in the project, it's not yet in your game. You need to bring it into number two, which is the scene hierarchy. So that's a structure. You can think of it like a big long tree of different assets under each asset. And only when you put them in number two there does it appear in the game. So you can imagine that that's useful because at the beginning you might have lots of different characters and levels and assets and items that you're not sure you want to use yet. And it's only as you're developing you drag them into the right experience and add code on top. Each time you're relating to your scene, You can then look at number 5 there, which allows you to look at the 3D world you're assembling from any angle. You can drag around and, look at it from the top, bottom, left, right, make sure you have everything lined up. And then finally, number 6 there, it only shows through the game camera, which there's typically one camera in the game scene pointed in one direction. So that's where you get to test out the end user's experience. So here we have kind of a blue spacey background and a red ship, as well as some little text that's on the screen. And we'll see that when we get into the game there. So within software, there's what's called the software development lifecycle. That starts from everything from sketching your original ideas and planning it out, designing the game. Unity really becomes most useful and powerful in the second half, in the development stage where you start prototyping your ideas, in the testing phase where you and other people on your team play it, see if it's fun, get feedback, and then finally you deploy it where you can put it on all those different devices that I mentioned. You might create a game that's only for iOS, only for Android, or you could have it port to all sorts of different platforms at once. So let's talk about some of the core Unity concepts. So Brian, do you have any experience whatsoever with Unity and the Unity editor?
Apart from playing the games, none whatsoever.
Okay, good. So as we step through this, I'll ask you some key questions to see if you're catching up. Okay. If you have any questions along the way, you ask me and we'll go through it.
All right.
So let's talk about the structure of Unity. So when we're playing games, as Brian mentioned, you know that you're looking at something on a screen. It looks kind of like a cartoon or a movie. So we're used to experiencing it as a player. You have some way to have input, a gamepad, a mouse, using touch swipes on a mobile. Yeah. But how does the structure in that world actually work? So within Unity, you can imagine the game scene, which is the 3D world. That's represented here as a big pink box. So that's everything that could possibly be on camera. And if the camera is pointed at it, then we see it as the user. But, characters can come from behind the camera, and only when they come in front do you actually see them getting rendered, right?
Yes.
So a core concept in Unity is what's called the game object. Now, a game object is at the heart of everything. You can imagine the structure is you open up a project that has a scene in it. That's the 3D world. The scene has game objects in it. That's like the thing that you see, the character walking, the ship, the blue spacey background. Each one of those is a game object. Now, game objects can do graphical things like represent 3D and 2D. They can do functional things like capture input from the user. They can play audio. And the way that a game object knows how much stuff it can do is it uses components. So here in this little diagram is just one way it could work. We have a game object at the center. If we want it to collide in 3D so that it bounces off other objects, as you might want in a game, we add the collider component. If you want it to play audio, you add the audio component. If you want it to have particle systems, we'll talk a little bit about that later. Things like smoke and fire and different cool effects. That's the particle system game object, component.
Yeah.
There's hundreds of components available, and most importantly, you can create your own. So the level of the component is what it does, and the game object is like the thing at the center of it. So do you have any questions about that basic explanation there?
I think I'm good at the point. To that point, I tried. Let me break a bit. I played Doom 2016.
Yeah.
So the game had a mode whereby you were allowed to create your own game within the game. So I happened to have experienced this because I realized I had to place the map. Like they already had finished maps. So what you had to do was like connect this room with a pathway, doorway. You had to put in systems to make sure that if you entered inside the door, it would have a sound. It has an activator where you step on the door and then the door opens. So this now makes it more clear and understand, so that's what I was doing with that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and when we talk about coding, the coding sits as a component too. So anytime you want to have some custom code that does something that only your game does because you invent this logic, you put that as a component and you drag it onto your game object. Cool. So that's the high level structure. Now let's take a look at a screenshot from a mobile game. This is Subway Surfers, which is a super popular downloadable mobile game. And if you imagine, the actual screenshot there on the left, then we have a little mock-up showing what are the different areas of the screen. Well, each significant area is a game object. And if we want to reuse that game object in one or more spots, like the coin, then Unity has a special name for a reusable game object. It's called a prefab. So by making something a prefab in Unity, you're saying, I might want to use it more than once in this world or in other worlds that I'm creating in different scenes. So you don't have to recreate them from scratch every time. You kind of declare it as reusable, and then you drag it into your scene. So here we have our player prefab at the center there, bottom, the middle there, character in white, represented as the blue square. And then these yellow squares indicate, well, all the different coins you'd have in the world. You can imagine some assets in a scene, there could be hundreds or thousands of them. Bullets flying around may all individually be a prefab. So whenever I say game object, if you're thinking reusable game object, that's just a prefab. It's just a different word for the same thing.
Ah, okay.
Any questions about what we're seeing here?
No.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So now we talked about how on each game object, there's different components. There's one component that is required, and that's called the transform component. Now, typically when we think of the word transform, we think about changing something, right?
Yeah.
So this speaks about some of the changes, some of the most basic ones you can do. The position in the world, the rotation in the world, and then the scale. So there's lots of info here on the screen, but the most important concept is the position, the rotation, and the scale. So imagine your game character in Mortal Kombat. As it moves left and right on the screen, it is changing its position.
Yeah.
If the character went from standing to lying down, that's a change in rotation. So with your own custom code, you can make these things change over time.
Okay.
Cool. Any questions about that?
Good.
And you can see why this is so required, because almost everything visual, you're going to want to move it around, rotate it, and potentially scale it. So they always have this.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's talk about the camera. Now, I mentioned that in the game world, you're only able to see things if they pass in front of the camera. So Unity does a process called culling, which in number one here we see if something's not in front of the camera, we don't want to spend any of your device resources rendering it, right?
Yeah.
So if it's off the camera's view, the system is smartly knows not even to bother rendering it, right?
Okay.
Then the things that are in front, the rendering process, like you've heard the term rendering before, right?
Yes.
Okay. So rendering is turning 3D information in that world into 2D information so the user can see it. And there's a little hint there, Ryan, but what is the one smallest bit in the rendering?
Pixel.
The pixel, right.
Yes.
So there's pixels all over your screen. Modern screens could be 4,000 pixels wide by so many tall. So we're talking about millions of pixels that get pushed out, and Unity is able to make 2D and 3D games for the best modern devices as well.
Okay.
There's lots of different effects and processes you can do on top of that. One of them is post-processing. So if you want to have your entire screen fade out or get brighter or get blurrier or get sharper, those are all some post-processing effects you have there. So these are the fundamentals. You put your camera in the scene, there's objects in front of the camera, only the ones in the view get rendered into pixels, and then maybe your game does some post-processing on it. And that's it for the camera. Any questions about that?
Good.
All right, cool. So let's take a look at the demo here. I'm going to open up first Unity Hub and then Unity itself.
Okay.
So for each of the demos, we're going to test what we've learned here in the theory and apply it into Unity. So we'll create a new scene. We'll put a script on that scene. So we'll be using a component and a game object there.
Yeah.
We'll create a prefab out of it just to show if we wanted to reuse this, we could. And then we'll play the scene. Okay. All right. So when you open up Unity, First, you open this welcome screen called the Unity Hub. It will list all the projects that you've already worked on. For me, I cleaned it up a little bit, so we just have the one project to open here. And there's also some nice menu options. The one that I wanted to mention is it has a free learn area. So if you're new to Unity and you want to learn the very basics of what are the different parts of the screen, what are they called, from everything up to how do I make a VR game, right? You'd be able to see template projects, videos. Some are just shortcuts to nice YouTube videos that are recommended, but you can learn the basics here if you're interested in what we're going to show briefly here.
Okay.
So in the project, I would open up the Unity just by clicking it. I've already done that in the interest of time. So here we are inside Unity. So the key areas that I want to mention are the project window is everything that can possibly be in your project, in your game rather. Then we have this concept of the world or the scene, and I have them broken down to some different examples. I've got a completely empty one here, and then some key samples we'll get to later. So let's look at what a completely empty one looks like, and later on we'll come and look at this ship demo. So here's a completely empty scene. Up here, what we get for free in an empty scene, it's not technically empty, it's a little bit. It's got a little bit of light, just so we can see something, and then it's got the camera. So there's two different views here in the center that both look like a little blue horizon. The one on the left is the game view. That represents what the end users are going to see, right? So if we created something and it was in front of the camera, it'll get rendered there. The right view is called the scene view. It looks kind of similar, but I can freely drag stuff around, and I could select the light in the scene and I could move it. So it's like an interactive version with a little bit more functionality. So let's see what we would do here. In the hierarchy, if I wanted to create a new 3D object, there's lots of different choices. You could bring in character models, whole worlds, rolling hills and mountains, all different sorts of stuff. But when you're starting with games, you use what are called the primitive objects. They're just very basic ones to get the ball rolling, to start thinking about your idea. So let's create a cube. Now we can see here it's represented both in the scene view and in the game view in a little bit different way. The scene view, since I'm a developer and I have full access, I can spin it around. I'm able to change the position of that object. And you notice that I don't see as many options when I click around here. That's because that simulates, well, what is the end user going to do? So they're not going to be able to drag and drop like a dev, right? So that's why we have these two screens. So when you click on anything in the world, like the cube here, there's the inspector view. And the inspector view shows a lot of info, but I just want to remind us we learned about the transform here. Now, an interesting aspect of Unity is that while the game is playing, we're about to hit play and run this simple scene, we're able to tweak the transform while it's running. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll just run the scene here. We don't really notice much, except some of the screen gets a little darker, so we get our attention here. But I could go over here into the scene view, and I could still move this. Now, we're in the live running game, but I'm still able to manipulate stuff. I can also come over here to the inspector, and I could tweak the position here. I could tweak the rotation here. I could tweak the scale. So I'm able to use either the scene view or the inspector view to make some tweaks. And that's really cool and a nice aspect of Unity, because as your project gets bigger and bigger and bigger, you could play the scene, walk your character up to a cliff's edge, and then decide, oh, that cliff needs to be a little bigger. So you're able to play the game and design it while it's being played. So that's quite cool. So we'll end this section by just adding the simplest form of scripting onto it. We'll talk about scripting in deeper a little bit later, but let's just see how it would work. So I've already got a script here that I wrote called Spinning Cube. I'm just going to drag it onto the cube, and then I'll hit play again. And the only difference we see is now that that cube constantly spins, right? So when we talk a bit more about code, we'll see that spinning cubes isn't the only thing we could do. We could take user input, we could change different values, play audio, render graphics, tons of different stuff. And it's all done with some coding, and then that drag and drop is the final step. So that's it for inside the Unity editor. Based on what we see here, Brian, do you have any thoughts, questions?
Now I'm starting to wonder the amount of time they put to make one game, because I'm seeing the moving parts.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested to see actually what I can do with this. I'm now like, I had the idea of jumping into it. Now I'm like, hold on, I want to get down with it. So far, it's very interesting. I'm learning a lot. So I have a background in design, and I've done a couple design classes. So I tried Maya a bit, but it was a while back in 2016. So
Yeah.
I feel this will come in hand with the knowledge, especially when I want to move things in the world. But so far, so good. I'm really learning a lot.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So Maya, as you mentioned, that's a different program. You'd open it up. It has some similarities, but Maya's used to create 3D models. Things much more interesting than a cube.
Yeah.
And then if you create something like a world or a character in Maya, you import it into Unity, and then you can add the interactivity and the behavior on top. While this is running, I'll just tweak a couple more things since I just thought about it. So if we click on a directional light here, I could go over and tweak some settings like the color of the light. So while the game is running here, I could give it some different settings. So everything in the scene, not just your character, is tweakable live so that you can keep iterating on it like that.
Okay.
Cool. So we'll go back to the slides. So that's it for this video. Brian already recapped some of the thoughts here, but again, the Unity editor is the tool that we use. We open it up, and as Unity developers of art types, programming types, you spend most of your day in and around the Unity editor, doing all sorts of different things, from level design to creating your characters to giving them interactivity, etc. We've seen opening up Unity in an existing project there, and creating a cube out there. We saw a little hint that there's a spaceship demo that we'll get to later. Any other questions, comments based on what we've seen?
This is really engaging. I'm like looking forward to the more we go. I'm discovering a lot so far, and it's really interesting. Like this could be a game on its own. I feel like just designing the thing itself feels like an adventure.
Yeah.
Looking at the sizes, resizing, adding colors, movement, and all that. It's just mind blowing.
I find game development is a lot like solving puzzles. So if you like puzzle video games, this is
Exactly.
really like
That was what I was going
Yeah,
for.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we did drag and drop some existing code onto our cube to see it spin, but how do we actually create that code? So that's something we'll take a look at next.